The chilly July morning of 2022 began with an unusual disturbance on Cedar Street in the small town of Crescent City, California. 6 unmarked police cars quietly pulled up in front of a one-story wooden house nestled among old pine trees. Neighbors peeked through their curtains as officers in tactical gear from the California Department of Justice positioned themselves around the area, moving in silence. Inside, Christopher McCallen, 64 years old, was brewing his morning coffee, a daily routine ever since he retired after more than 40 years as a city garbage collector. A rapid knocking sounded at 7:32 a.m. Christopher McCallen, California Department of Justice. We have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the 1983 disappearance of Rachel Worthing. The officers later recounted that McCallen's hand trembled slightly as he set down his coffee cup, but his face remained strangely calm, as if he had known this moment was coming and had been waiting for it for nearly 40 years. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. In 1983, in the coastal town of Truro Cove in Mendocino County, California, life moved slowly and peacefully, as if nothing unusual could ever happen. Narrow roads covered in morning mist led to the beach, where steady waves crashed against the cliffs, leaving white foam rolling onto the sand. In that setting, Rachel Worthing, 40 years old, a former fashion reporter in Los Angeles, chose to leave the city to live with her 2-year-old daughter, Ava. Her small white house was tucked among pine groves, facing directly onto the bay, where windows were always open to let in the sea breeze and the salty scent that permeated every room. The mother and daughter's life was simple but warm. Rachel usually cared for her child, wrote freelance articles for magazines, and occasionally drove to the nearby town for essentials. Neighbors described her as calm, reserved, with few relationships, but always polite and well-liked by everyone. On a Sunday morning in mid-June, the weather was clear with a vast pale blue sky. Rachel woke up earlier than usual, prepared breakfast, packed a small bag for Ava, and put a light jacket on her daughter. She told a neighbor she would be out for the day and might stop by the Santa Rosa market, a not uncommon habit for her on weekends. Rachel's gray Volvo left the dirt path leading to the main road, slowly disappearing around the bend, leaving behind only the fading sound of the engine in the wind. As the afternoon passed, neighbors still saw the house silent, curtains drawn, no sign of anyone returning. By evening, when the house lights were on but the phone rang unanswered, a sense of unease began to spread. Her family in town heard that Rachel hadn't returned as planned. They tried calling a few of her friends in Santa Rosa and Los Angeles, but no one knew where Rachel was. As time passed without news, all reasonable assumptions became meaningless. Rachel's relatives, who believed she had just gone somewhere temporarily, began to realize that something was truly wrong. The small house lay silent in the night, light from the living room still spilling through the glass window, like a vague reminder of the inexplicable absence of the woman who was always careful and punctual. By the end of the second day, worry had turned into clear fear. The family decided to call the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office to report the disappearance, hoping authorities could locate Rachel and the child. The next morning, the sheriff's office received the official call from Rachel Worthing's relatives. The report was logged as an urgent missing persons case, something rare in Truro Cove, where no one had vanished without a trace for many years. Sheriff Michael Ortega, in charge of the coastal area, was immediately assigned to investigate. He was experienced, having handled many accidents and sea rescues, but this was the first time facing a case where all initial signs were suspiciously vague. Ortega arrived at Rachel's house with 2 deputies mid-morning. The road to her small home was deserted, only the wind rustling through the pines audible. The front door was locked tight, with no signs of forced entry. Ortega asked relatives for the key to enter. The air inside was still, smelling of sea salt dampness and wood. The living room light was still on, a small table lamp on the shelf casting weak light. On the table was a cooled cup of coffee next to an open magazine. The kitchen was clean, everything neatly arranged, only half a slice of bread and a butter knife placed askew by the plate. Ortega bent down to check the floor. No strange footprints, no shards or scattered items. In Rachel's bedroom, blankets and pillows were folded flat, clothes tidy in the closet. A small suitcase covered in a thin layer of dust, indicating it hadn't been used in a while. No sign she was preparing for a long trip. Ava's room was neat. The child's bed made with blankets folded, a doll lying on its side on the pillow, seemingly placed there from the previous morning. Ortega went to the back of the house, checking the rear door and windows, all locked, no pry marks or damage. He opened his notebook, recording observations one by one. Doors locked, lights on, no disturbance, no signs of break-in. Back in the living room, Ortega checked the landline phone for recent calls. The last call was made 2 days earlier, to a grocery store in Santa Rosa. No others. The phone line worked normally. On the desk, an open envelope with Rachel's unfinished article draft for a Los Angeles magazine. Ortega paused for a moment at the incomplete writing on the page, then continued checking drawers, confirming no ID or valuables missing. When checking the back porch area, he found the child's stroller still in the corner against the wall, wheels covered in a thin layer of dust, proving it hadn't been used in days. Everything in the house seemed frozen at Sunday morning, as if Rachel had just stepped out for a moment and never returned. Ortega stepped out to the front yard, where neighbors were waiting. They recounted that morning. Rachel said she was going out with Ava, and seemed completely normal, not worried or rushed. No one saw her return. Ortega quietly took notes and returned to his patrol car. In his mind, a conclusion was forming: no signs of struggle, no preparation for a long trip, no missing property, so the chance Rachel left voluntarily was nearly zero. Back at the office, Ortega completed the initial report, noting clearly: victim, Rachel Worthing, female, 40 years old. Status missing for unknown reasons, suspected unusual factors. He decided to organize an urgent search along Pacific Drive, the coastal road connecting Truro Cove to Santa Rosa, where Rachel often went on weekends. Search teams were mobilized, area maps spread on the table, red dots marking key checkpoints. As Ortega signed off on the plan, the room was dead silent. No one said it, but everyone understood they were no longer looking for someone lost. They were facing something far more serious. That afternoon, right after the search order was issued, the entire Mendocino County Sheriff's Force coordinated with coastal rescue teams and town volunteers to quickly take positions. This was the largest operation Truro Cove had seen in years. A search stretching along Pacific Drive, through remote coastal roads and windy dense forests. In the small sheriff's meeting room, the area map covered the table. Red marker checkpoints connecting from southern residential areas to northern forests near Fort Bragg. Ortega stood at the head of the table, voice low but firm as he assigned tasks to each group. The first group handled scanning Pacific Drive, the road Rachel often took, running parallel to the coast. The second was tasked with checking low forest areas with trails leading to rocky beaches. The third covered cliff edges and remote beaches in case of an accident. The final group expanded to the small industrial area near Fort Bragg, with warehouses and machine shops sparsely trafficked. Ortega required detailed recording of every trace, no matter how small, and photographing the scene before moving anything. As the search began, sea fog was still thick. Cold wind made observation difficult. Teams split up along road sections, walkers mixed with patrol vehicles. Some areas searched with K9 units. Radios crackled constantly, reporting completed areas, then shifting to the next. In the forest, dry leaves blown into thick layers left unclear small indentations. Searchers collected a few fabric fibers on low branches, but preliminary checks determined they were unrelated. On the western rocky shore, large waves crashed against steep cliffs, water spraying like white smoke. Some volunteers tried peering below, but visibility was limited. They only saw floating sea foam, no signs of a vehicle or items. Meanwhile, Ortega and 2 officers scanned along Pacific Drive. The road was empty, flanked by pine forests and sandy hills. He stopped the vehicle multiple times to check side turns, finding only faint old tire marks, undated. In the Fort Bragg industrial area, a few abandoned warehouses with locked iron doors, dark inside, ground covered in dust, and the area's characteristic red sand. Ortega ordered soil samples photographed, coordinates noted, and some collected for lab comparison later. The search lasted all day until dusk, with no signs Rachel or her car had been in the surveyed area. No personal items, clothing or activity traces found. The team's mood was heavy. Ortega temporarily halted the operation for rest and regroup at the coastal rescue station late afternoon. While reporting results, an older fisherman volunteer from the northern area entered and said a few days earlier he saw a gray car like Rachel's parked near a side road to the Fort Bragg area, but couldn't recall the exact day. Ortega immediately asked him to describe the location. The man pointed on the map, circling land bordering the industrial edge, where a small road led to an old red sand lot. This information caught Ortega's attention, as it was outside the initial search boundary. He marked it in blue ink and ordered expansion 15 miles north, including all of Fort Bragg and adjacent coastal areas. Teams were to return to starting positions early next morning for continued scanning with a more detailed plan, focusing on remote spots, wastelands, and unmarked trails. As evening fell, thick fog enveloped the bay, patrol vehicle lights mere hazy streaks in the cold mist. Ortega noted in the interim report to the county office, no vehicle or victim traces found. Witness unclear on observation time, but information sufficient to expand search north. He closed his notebook, leaned against the car door, staring into the pitch black ahead. After many years policing this coastal area, witnessing countless accidents, this was the first time he felt something hidden under the thick fog and ocean silence, something not as simple as someone lost in the night. 2 days after the search expanded north, a coastal patrol team discovered a notable object on a small road connecting Pacific Drive to the remote rocky shore of Fort Bragg. It was early morning, sea fog still obscuring the road. Visibility limited to a few dozen meters. One volunteer leading the group spotted a faint metal reflection in the gray mist. As they approached, the shape of a car emerged. A silver-gray Volvo, same make and license plate as Rachel Worthing's. Ortega was immediately called to the scene. The car was parked askew on the roadside, right front wheel slightly sunk into damp sand. The driver's door was ajar, as if someone had just stepped out and hadn't locked or intended to. No collision damage, no signs of towing or falling. Ortega signaled to cordon off a 300-meter radius, preventing approach until the forensics team arrived. He approached to observe, seeing Rachel's wallet on the passenger seat, containing full ID, bank cards, and some cash. The driver's seat was adjusted farther back than typical for a woman's driving habit, which he noted in his handbook. In the trunk, a few grocery bags intact, produce starting to wilt. No struggle signs, no blood, no broken glass. Ortega circled to the rear, where faint tire tracks led from the road to the parking spot. On the sand, tracks were clear, but partially erased by sea wind and moisture. He ordered full photography of traces and searching around. Less than 10 minutes later, a searcher called out. About 20 meters from the car, near wild grass on the slope, a faint child's whimper. Ortega and colleagues ran over. A small girl was found sitting against a rock, covered in sand, face pale, eyes wide with fear. She wore the floral dress neighbors described Rachel putting on her Sunday. Ortega knelt, gently draping his jacket over the child, reassuring in a calm voice. A medic with the group quickly checked, exhausted, mildly dehydrated, but no injuries. When asked her name, the child softly said one word, Ava. The entire team fell silent. Ortega signaled for an ambulance to take Ava to the nearest medical station for care, and requested forensics to approach the car. The atmosphere grew heavy. Police used tape and chalk to mark key positions around the car. Door handles, driver's seat, front floor, and outside ground with faint footprints. A small pink blanket was found on the back seat, with some sand grains on the edge. Ortega recorded every detail, following procedure step by step as he knew this was no longer a standard rescue search. In the cabin, besides Rachel's wallet and papers, a small bag with child items, an empty bottle, tissue box, picture book. No signs Rachel left voluntarily. From a professional view, Ortega knew when a mother disappears, leaving a young child, voluntary departure, chance is nearly zero. He ordered sand samples from under the floor mats, sealing all items in the car, including blanket, seats, and carpet. The surrounding area was temporarily tented to protect evidence from sea moisture. When the forensics team arrived, they photographed in detail from every angle. Ortega stood silent for a moment, eyes on the foggy ocean. No struggle signs, no drag marks, no blood, but that absolute cleanliness chilled him. He ordered the car towed to the Mendocino Sheriff's Office under forensic supervision. All scene evidence collected separately, carefully numbered. Ortega personally signed the sealing report. Before leaving the scene, he looked back once more at the car, now just a cold metal block, standing alone in thick fog. The search, that started hoping to find a lost woman, had shifted. Ortega noted in the interim report to the county, victim's gray Volvo found in remote coastal area, north of Fort Bragg. Door ajar, wallet, and papers intact. No struggle or theft signs. Victim's 2-year-old daughter found nearby, exhausted but safe. Back at headquarters, Ortega held an emergency meeting with deputies. He declared the case upgraded from standard missing persons to criminal investigation. The force's goal now was not finding a missing person, but determining what happened between Rachel leaving home and her car appearing in that empty land. In the day's final note, Ortega added a short line: no fight signs, no voluntary departure signs. Consider third-party involvement. Then he set down the pen, closed the notebook, and silently looked through the window glass, where fog still covered the coastal road. The road that just 2 days earlier, Rachel and her little daughter had traveled for the last time. The morning after the Volvo was towed to the Mendocino County Sheriff's headquarters, Ortega directed the forensics team to conduct a comprehensive examination. The vehicle was placed in the department's enclosed warehouse under strong white lighting and in temperature-controlled conditions to avoid damaging any traces. Every team member wore protective gear, gloves, and masks, adhering to strict protocols because Ortega wanted every detail, no matter how small, recorded. The forensic technicians began by taking overall photographs from multiple angles, both inside and out, before touching any part. The driver's and passenger's doors were checked first. On the driver's door handle, they found several faint fingerprints, some of which did not match Rachel's records. These were close-up photographed and sampled immediately. Interior surfaces, steering wheel, gear shift, dashboard, armrests, were dusted for potential prints. A few clear prints were found on the steering wheel, but overlapped multiple times, making preliminary analysis difficult. Ortega ordered all stored for later comparison. When examining the driver's seat, a notable detail emerged. The seat was pushed farther back than Rachel's usual distance. According to relatives, Rachel was average height and always adjusted the seat quite close to the wheel, while the current distance suited a taller man. Ortega noted this discrepancy and had the entire floor photographed, including the seat track rails. Under the driver's seat, technicians discovered a small shiny object. After carefully retrieving it, they identified it as a broken silver necklace fragment, the thin chain twisted at the clasp. Ortega cross-referenced with Rachel's relatives and confirmed she often wore such a silver chain. The evidence was placed in a separate sealed bag, labeled Item 04, Silver Chain Fragment, with date and time of collection noted. Continuing to check the floor, the forensics team noticed the mats under the driver's and passenger's feet were covered in fine sand. When shaking out the mats, they found the sand was dark red, completely different from the yellowish-gray sand typical of the Truro Cove area. A portion was scooped with a specialized stainless steel spoon into a glass vial labeled Red Sand A1. Ortega requested direct visual comparison with samples from the discovery site, and the difference was clear. Seen sand was pale gray, while the car sample was reddish with finer grains mixed with tiny iron flecks. He suspected the vehicle had passed through or stopped in a geologically different area, possibly an industrial or mining zone. The team continued to the trunk and rear seats. In the trunk were several grocery bags, produce wilted, but notably a thin layer of red sand on the inner trunk edge, identical to the floor mats. This reinforced the hypothesis that the soil didn't enter via wind or passers-by, but appeared when the car was elsewhere with similar ground. On the back seat, they found a small child's blanket with faint handprints. Fabric fibers, hairs, and sand grains were all collected and stored in separate packets. All operations were continuously video recorded for transparency. When interior examination was complete, forensics moved to the undercarriage. Dried mud around the rear axle was sampled, also containing fine dark red particles. Ortega signaled technicians to collect all dried mud for parallel analysis with red sand A1. On the exterior, no collision damage or fresh scratches. Side mirrors intact, paint not peeling, tires evenly worn, indicating no accident before abandonment. Upon completion, Ortega observed the entire examination scene, reviewing each item in the report. He felt the case growing increasingly unusual. No robbery signs, no struggle signs, but odd details about the driver's seat, broken necklace, and unidentified red soil. All factors pointed to someone else driving the car after Rachel's disappearance. By noon, all evidence was classified, sealed, and transferred to the Santa Rosa lab for geological composition analysis and DNA testing. Ortega signed off on the file with a private note. Red sand A1, sample needs origin area identification. Prioritize tracing to determine victim or vehicle movement route. After finishing the session, he closed the document case, paused to look through the evidence warehouse window where the gray Volvo sat silently in the damp, cold yard. Everything inside seemed frozen at the moment Rachel left, only the red dust layers still speaking about where she had been, or about who had driven that car in her place. 3 days after the samples were sent, preliminary analysis results from the Santa Rosa lab were forwarded to the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office. The report was just over 3 pages, but for Ortega, it was the first breakthrough in a week of scattered data. According to the analysis, the soil labeled red sand A1 contained high levels of iron oxide and hematite minerals, creating the characteristic red color. Fine-grained structure mixed with metal dust and mechanical grit, a material rare in coastal residential areas, but common in industrial zones and metal processing yards. In the geological comparison section, the lab noted clearly, soil composition matches samples from the Fort Bragg industrial area, Mendocino County, 20 miles north of the scene. Ortega read and reread this section, underlining it in red pen. Fort Bragg had always been the county's industrial suburb, with warehouses, lumber mills, and metal scrap yards. If Rachel's car had been there, it meant she left the Truro Cove area before disappearing. An initial hypothesis formed: Rachel may have driven or been taken to Fort Bragg, where this red soil covered most roads and lots. Ortega requested the technical unit to map the route between the two locations and calculate travel time. Results showed less than 30 minutes driving from Rachel's home to Fort Bragg. With a 4-hour gap between leaving home and the car being found, her presence there was entirely plausible. To verify the hypothesis, Ortega needed to identify who might have contacted Rachel in her final days. He ordered the investigation team to rescreen her personal relationships, focusing on 3 men who regularly appeared in the victim's life. The first was Anthony Jackman, a fishing boat captain at the Santa Rosa port, reportedly Rachel's ex-lover. They met when she moved to Mendocino, appeared together at a few community events, but recently cut contact. Neighbors said the breakup was not amicable, as Rachel often complained about him avoiding responsibility when she became pregnant with Ava. Ortega saw this as a potentially conflict-ridden relationship. He requested verification of Anthony's work schedule on the disappearance day and witness statements from the port. The second was Tom Arnold, Rachel's old friend, living less than a mile from her home. Tom was described as frequently helping with repairs and transporting goods when needed. Neighbors said he was the last seen talking to Rachel a few days before she vanished. Ortega suspected Tom knew more than he let on, as area familiarity could allow unnoticed movement. He ordered Tom listed as a person with relevant information for interrogation preparation. The last was Christopher McCallen, a city garbage collector working the route past Rachel's house twice weekly. McCallen was in his 40s, lived alone in the southern suburbs. Colleagues described him as quiet, evasive, with a history of minor workplace altercations. Personnel reports showed no serious criminal record, but Ortega noted one detail on the Sunday morning of Rachel's disappearance. McCallen's garbage truck route passed along Pacific Drive, overlapping Rachel's usual path. This made him one of the last with potential to see her. Ortega compiled all information into a summary table. 3 names, 3 different connections but sharing one thing: regular presence in Rachel's daily life and opportunity for access. In the memo to the investigation team, Ortega wrote, "Need to verify each individual's interaction level with the victim in the 72 hours before disappearance. Prioritize schedules, witnesses, and phone activity." He also requested technical units to collect all transaction receipts, notes, or documents, possibly showing Rachel left Truro Cove that day. As the meeting ended, Ortega looked at the wall map, a red line connecting Rachel's home to Fort Bragg, marked in marker. If the car soil truly came from that industrial area, the next step was finding why she was there and who accompanied her to the journey's end. In his work log, he wrote the day's conclusion: soil analysis indicates high likelihood vehicle passed through Fort Bragg area. Need to determine cause and directly involved parties. 3 individuals entered interrogation list: Anthony Jackman, Tom Arnold, Christopher McCallen. Objective: clarify personal relationships with victim, identify motives or time overlaps. As he signed confirmation, Ortega knew the case was no longer an accidental disappearance. What initially seemed dry geological data had opened a new investigative direction, leading straight to where Rachel Worthing may have gone, and perhaps where everything truly began. After the list of 3 related individuals was confirmed, Ortega scheduled interrogations sequentially over 2 days. He wanted to start by eliminating cases with clear alibis to focus on more complex suspicions. The first summoned was Anthony Jackman, the fishing boat captain at Santa Rosa Port. He arrived on time, neatly dressed, face calm but eyes cautious. Ortega began with simple questions: departure time, crew count, fishing schedule. Anthony explained clearly, providing the voyage log and crew list. According to 3 crew members, they left port early Sunday morning and returned only late the next evening. Port authority logs confirmed Anthony's boat departed at 5 a.m. on the disappearance day. Ortega had it independently verified, results matched. No irregularities in his statement, except Anthony showed remorse when mentioning Rachel. He said they broke up nearly a year ago, kept occasional contact for the daughter, but the relationship was completely over. Ortega noted briefly in the file, has alibi, removed from suspect list. The second, Tom Arnold, arrived at headquarters, looking tired and impatient. He was considered Rachel's closest acquaintance among neighbors, having helped fix the roof and drive her to the market a few times. When asked the last time he saw Rachel, Tom said he spotted her a few days before the disappearance. But when Ortega pressed for the exact day, he hesitated, giving 2 different times. Ortega noted every detail. Tom said that morning he passed through the Fort Bragg area to pick up items, but earlier claimed he stayed home all weekend. When asked why he was near the discovery scene, Tom explained he heard about the search team and drove to help. However, some volunteers said he arrived in the area just minutes after the car was found, before any public announcement. Ortega asked how he knew the location. Tom vaguely replied, heard on local radio, while the broadcast aired a full hour later. The contradictions raised suspicion, but there was still no basis for charges. He closely observed Tom's gestures, hands always clenched, eyes avoiding direct contact. Still, during the over 2-hour session, no statement carried enough weight to shift the investigation. Ortega concluded temporarily, inconsistent statements needs further verification, but no physical evidence. By the afternoon, the third suspect, Christopher McCallen, was brought in. He appeared in his old city worker uniform, baseball cap pulled low covering nearly half his face. Records showed McCallen worked for the municipal sanitation company, responsible for garbage collection in the area, including Rachel's home. Ortega observed how he sat down, back rigid, hands placed close to his thighs. When asked about the Sunday morning of Rachel's disappearance, McCallen answered slowly, sometimes pausing. He said, "I was just doing my job. My truck followed the regular route, didn't see anything unusual." Ortega asked if he encountered Rachel or the gray Volvo during work. McCallen replied firmly, "No." But when asked the same question at the end of the session, he said, "I don't remember for sure, maybe I saw some car parked on the roadside." Ortega immediately noticed the change and requested clarification, but McCallen fell silent, looking down at his hands. During the interrogation, he frequently avoided eye contact with the questioner, and when asked affirmative questions, "Did you ever talk to Rachel that week?" McCallen's reactions were always slow, as if thinking before answering. Ortega noted, tense reactions, repetitive statements, inconsistent, signs of concealing information. After the session, he had technicians check the city garbage truck's movement logs for that Sunday. The record showed McCallen's truck passed along Pacific Drive after 9 a.m., overlapping the time Rachel might have been on the road. When asked about this detail in a short re-interrogation the same day, McCallen said, "I only stopped to check trash bins, didn't see anyone." Ortega maintained a neutral demeanor, not pushing the session too hard, but inside he increasingly felt the connection between McCallen and Rachel's disappearance could not be ignored. That evening, Ortega sat alone in his office, reviewing all 3 interrogation transcripts. He underlined key points. Anthony had clear alibi. No motive. Tom Arnold lied about timing but lacked physical evidence. McCallen had opportunity to contact the victim and appeared flustered when confronted. Ortega pinned photos of the 3 on the board in order, circling McCallen's name in red pen with a small note beside it, "Person of interest, needs monitoring." From an investigator's perspective, this was not an accusation but the first step in identifying the main investigative direction. He understood that to advance further, he needed more concrete evidence, something that could link McCallen to the car, to the red soil in Fort Bragg, or to Rachel's missing time period. But at least, amid the scattered data, he had found a name that began bringing order to the puzzle pieces. As the office lights went out, Ortega closed his notebook, leaving on the desk that day's internal report with a brief summary. 3 subjects interrogated, no direct evidence, 1 with suspicious behavior, inconsistent statements, temporarily monitor. After completing the interrogations and reviewing all statements, Ortega decided to shift focus to reconstructing Rachel's travel route on the day she disappeared. He believed that without direct evidence, the only way to get closer to the truth was to accurately recreate the path she might have taken, minute by minute. Based on neighbor accounts, Rachel left home around after 8 a.m. Sunday with her daughter and a small bag. From her home to Central Truro Cove was a 10-minute drive, then connecting to Pacific Drive, the only road to Santa Rosa. Ortega and the investigation team began reconstructing that journey. A patrol car drove slowly along each segment, following the assumed route, calculating logical stops: gas station, grocery store, post office, and the small market Rachel frequented. Round-trip travel time was under an hour and a half, even with shopping stops. Yet, according to the scene report, Rachel's car was only discovered Tuesday morning, while her disappearance was pinned to Sunday morning. Even counting just the first day, there remained at least a 4-hour gap between leaving home and when anyone might have last seen the car. Ortega marked this gap on the timeline: 8 o'clock, leaves home. 12 o'clock, location unknown. He ordered the team to screen all potential witnesses on that road segment during morning hours. Police visited every store, gas station, asking owners, truck drivers, fishermen, but no one remembered seeing Rachel or the gray Volvo. Most said that morning the fog was thick, visibility poor, and traffic very light. Ortega also had traffic camera systems checked, but in 1983, Truro Cove had no recording devices beyond a few private security cameras in Santa Rosa. The blurry tapes from the route's only gas station showed no clear images of the Volvo. Clues seemed to vanish in the coastal fog. Refusing to stop, Ortega turned to fuel analysis. He had technicians check the gas gauge to estimate distance traveled. Fuel consumption equaled about 40-45 miles, corresponding to the distance from Truro Cove to Fort Bragg and partway back along Pacific Drive. This data strengthened the initial Fort Bragg hypothesis. Ortega created a large map diagram, marking in red ink possible stopping points. He compared with the red soil found in the car, noting matches with the northern Fort Bragg industrial area's geology, abandoned warehouses, machine shops, old scrapyards. However, pinpointing the exact location remained impossible without witnesses or tire tracks surviving 2 days of light rain. Ortega and colleagues spent the entire week checking each point. They drove through Fort Bragg, stopping at empty lots, photographing, sampling soil for comparison. Everything proceeded in silence. At each stop, Ortega wondered if Rachel had stood here, or if someone had brought her here. Nothing confirmed, only overlapping possibilities. Back at headquarters, he sat staring at the note-covered map. Dozens of lines, hundreds of arrows, but still no answer. In that weekend's meeting, Ortega presented results. Travel from victim's home to Fort Bragg is possible, but no confirming witnesses. The 4-hour period from leaving home to when the car might have been discovered remains unexplained. A young officer asked, could she have driven there herself and had an accident? Ortega shook his head. If an accident, there would be traces. A person and car can't vanish at the same time. He paused, then added, I believe Rachel did not go to Fort Bragg on her own. She was intercepted or lured in a different direction. After speaking, Ortega retreated to the back of the meeting room, where the evidence board hung. Next to Rachel's photo, he taped a handwritten note, 4-hour gap, investigation focus. He understood this time period was the key. Whatever happened to Rachel had to occur within those 4 hours. The moment she left home, vanished from everyone's sight, and left the car in a place no one understood why it was there. In the following days, the investigation team continued screening side roads along Pacific Drive, but found only old tire marks and roadside trash. No shards, no related personal items. Ortega ordered a temporary halt to fieldwork for case file consolidation. He spent the evening reviewing every scene photo, from the car, soil samples, necklace, to each witness statement, all still scattered pieces. In the weekend summary report, he wrote, victim's possible travel route reconstructed. Discovered unaccounted 4-hour time period, no witnesses or imaging data recorded. High likelihood victim interfered with during travel. No additional physical evidence. That night, Truro Cove was still shrouded in thick fog. In the office, Ortega's desk lamp reflected on the spread-out map. The red markings stretched like dead-end roads, no endpoints. He set down his pen, looking at the last line he had just written. No further evidence. Case temporarily at impasse. By spring 1984, exactly 12 months since Rachel Worthing was recorded missing, the case file remained stalled. Reports stretched on, hundreds of pages of notes, statements, test results yielding no new leads. Ortega had re-examined every scene with colleagues multiple times, but every path led to a dead end. No body, no clear crime traces, no physical evidence strong enough for an arrest warrant or search of anyone. Every hypothesis, from accident, voluntary departure, to abduction, had been considered and partially dismissed for lack of basis. Whenever new information surfaced, it lasted a few days before being proven false. One witness claimed seeing a woman resembling Rachel in Santa Rosa, but investigation revealed only a mix-up. Another reported hearing an unusual car noise on Pacific Drive that morning, but no one could confirm it was the gray Volvo. Small hopes gradually replaced by fatigue and silence. For many months, Ortega continued to hold regular meetings to see if new directions could be opened. He repeatedly requested rescreening Rachel's personal relationships, but results remained unchanged. Anthony Jackman left Mendocino to work in San Diego. Tom Arnold moved to Oregon, and McCallen continued his normal job at the sanitation company with no suspicious signs. Ortega had undercover surveillance multiple times, but found nothing questionable. All efforts stopped at the lack of a starting point. No body, no blood, no weapon, no witnesses. Even the red soil samples from the car, once hoped to open a new investigative path, yielded no further results after expanded analysis. They only confirmed the vehicle had passed through the Fort Bragg area, unable to pinpoint exact location or time. In the summary report to the prosecutor's office, Ortega wrote, "No direct signs of violence. Insufficient criminal elements to recommend prosecution. Case maintained in open investigation status." Yet after receiving feedback from superiors, he was forced to admit resources for this case had reached their limit. The small Mendocino Sheriff's Office lacked budget to sustain an indefinite investigation without any legal evidence. Meetings gradually became less frequent, personnel reassigned to other cases. Only Ortega still spent evenings alone reviewing the file, flipping through each scene photo one by one. Under the dim desk lamp, the Volvo, silver necklace, red sand layer, all like memory fragments trapped in paper frames, unable to say more. In early April 1984, the county office officially issued a notice to temporarily close the file. The Rachel Worthing case was classified as unsolved disappearance, missing without conclusion. All evidence, including soil samples, fabric fibers, scene photos, and interrogation transcripts, was transferred to the Central Evidence Warehouse in Santa Rosa for long-term storage. Ortega personally inspected each sealed envelope before handover. He requested the file be marked with code MW803014, along with a small note indefinite storage, may reopen with new evidence. When the work was complete, Ortega stood before the storage shelves, looking at hundreds of case boxes lying still under fluorescent lights. He placed Rachel's file between two older cases, one undetermined accident and one disappearance with conclusion. The italicized Worthing Rachel on the box spine stood out more than all, like an ellipsis without end. He knew he could do no more. In his personal note, Ortega wrote briefly, "No body, no blood traces, case lacks legal footing to proceed further. All current investigative paths end in assumptions." That night, as he left the office, he turned off the lights, looking through the glass window outside. Truro Cove sank into darkness, only faint light from the distant lighthouse sweeping across the sea. Ortega felt something incomplete, but in the world of law and evidence, feelings were never enough. He could only leave the case there, waiting for new evidence to be found, if that day ever came. After Rachel Worthing's disappearance file was temporarily closed in 1984, it quickly became one of hundreds of unsolved cases lying dormant in the Mendocino County Evidence Warehouse. Time passed. The officers who participated in the initial investigation gradually retired or transferred. The sheriff's office went through many new commanders, and the name Rachel Worthing only appeared in old summaries, buried in long lists of unsolved disappearance, missing without conclusion. For Truro Cove residents, memories of Rachel also faded over the years. The small house where she lived was sold to another family, who had no idea it was once the center of a mysterious disappearance. Old neighbors sometimes mentioned Rachel in brief conversations, but the story gradually took on the tone of local folklore rather than a real event needing resolution. In the Santa Rosa Evidence Warehouse, the file box coded MW803014 remained on the third-tier shelf, Section D corner, labeled long-term storage. Inside were faded evidence items, several blurry scene photos, a bag with the silver chain fragment, some stained fabric fibers, and a glass vial containing the red soil sample labeled Red Sanda 1. Over the years, most evidence in old cases was affected by humidity, mold, or storage damage, but Rachel's red soil vial remained intact, lid sealed tight, seal tape, untorn, and the sand inside retaining its characteristic red color. In the 1990s, when DNA testing technology began application in California criminal investigations, the Mendocino office tried reviewing some old files. However, Rachel Worthing's case was not prioritized because no tissue or biological samples were identified as analyzable at the time. DNA testing on soil and inorganic materials was nearly impossible then. Ortega, now retired, once sent a letter proposing case review, but his suggestion was not approved due to lack of legal elements and excessive cost. File MW83014 continued to be forgotten, lying in the storage warehouse darkness. In the early 2000s, as cold cases gained media attention, a few local reporters read Rachel's file again. They wrote short articles about the woman who vanished with her Volvo. But the news appeared briefly in coastal newspapers before being replaced by newer events. No new data was added. No relatives remained patient enough to pursue. The name Rachel Worthing gradually vanished from collective memory. In the 2010 sex, California invested heavily in modern DNA analysis technology, especially trace biological extraction from old evidence. Many cases thought forgotten were reopened and solved with new tech, but file MW83014 remained on the shelf. As Ortega's evidence description noted, no blood, no tissue, evidence primarily inorganic. This made it unsuitable for DNA projects at the time. A few young investigators read the file, noted its strangeness, but set it aside for more urgent workloads. Over nearly 4 decades, the file was only periodically inventoried in 1993, 2005, and 2017 to confirm evidence condition. Each time, the warehouse manager noted the same comment: seal intact, no damage detected. To them, it was just a repeated administrative procedure without special meaning. For those who once knew Rachel, the case had become part of a distant past, tied to an era of handwritten records and no surveillance cameras to illuminate lost moments. In 2021, while most other old files were digitized, the paper file MW83014 remained in its original cardboard box, covered in time's dust. No one clearly remembered the woman in the cover photo, a black and white image of Rachel Worthing taken on the porch facing the sea, eyes looking far away. For the new generation of police, the case was just a code in the storage catalog. It was no longer mentioned in meetings, no petitions, no demands to reopen. It seemed all of Mendocino had accepted Rachel was gone forever. That the 1983 mystery was just a faint part of the small coastal town's history. And so, over nearly 4 decades, file MW83014 lay silent in a dark corner of the Santa Rosa evidence warehouse, where metal cabinets stacked atop each other, the smell of old paper mixed with metal and mildew. Among countless files thick with information on other cases, Rachel Worthing's documents were just a small box, but still carefully sealed, as if waiting for someone patient enough to open it again. Inside, the glass vial containing red sand remained, the fine sand as if untouched by time, the only remaining evidence of a disappearance almost no one remembered. In early 2022, the California Department of Justice launched a new program called the Cold Case Review Initiative, aimed at reviewing unsolved disappearances and murders from the 1970s, 1990s. Each county was required to submit lists of cases with preservable evidence. Among hundreds of old cases sent to the Sacramento Center was a small file coded MW83014 from Mendocino County, the disappearance of Rachel Worthing. For most investigators, it was just an unfamiliar name. But for Detective Lena Morales, newly assigned to the cold case unit, that file immediately caught her attention. Morales was a forensic specialist investigator, having participated in many projects recovering old evidence with micro-DNA technology. While screening the Santa Rosa storage evidence catalog, she noticed most early 1980s cases were noted, samples damaged or no longer analyzable. However, Rachel Worthing's had a different line. inorganic samples intact, seal undamaged. This piqued her curiosity. She requested transfer of the entire original file and related evidence to the central lab in Sacramento for examination. When opening the old file box, the smell of damp paper and time's dust wafted out, but everything inside was surprisingly well preserved. The glass vial containing red sand A1 retained its dark red color, the seal tape with Sheriff Michael Ortega's signature still clear. Morales carefully read the 1983 and 1984 original reports, from mineral analysis results to suspect interrogation transcripts. She noted in the margin, "No body, no tissue, no blood. Sole physical evidence, soil sample." Throughout her career, Morales had seen many cases solved by seemingly meaningless evidence, a hair, a fabric thread, or even dust grains. So she believed this soil sample might still hold something undiscovered in the era of limited technology. After consulting the lab, Morales proposed applying touch DNA technique, extracting DNA from skin traces, sweat, or epithelial cells remaining on inorganic objects. This was newly developed technology, allowing detection of DNA in extremely small samples, even just a few cells. Her proposal was approved for trial as part of the pilot project. On March 12, 2022, the red sand A1 sample was unsealed for the first time in nearly 40 years. The entire process was video recorded and supervised by 2 independent technicians to ensure legality. In the lab, Morales observed as technicians separated sand layers from the vial with sterile tools. Under fluorescent lights, the red sand grains sparkled with metallic reflections, signs of high iron content. Ortega had noted in his 1983 report the soil was divided into 3 parts, one for storage, one for control mineral analysis, and the rest for DNA testing. Using touch DNA, they applied special solutions to separate possible skin cells or biological fragments adhering to sand grains, unimaginable with 4-decade-old technology. While awaiting results, Morales continued carefully reading the original file. She paused at Ortega's handwritten notes. "No body, no blood traces. Case lacks legal footing to proceed further." Next to that line was another, small and nearly faded with time. "If origin of soil sample can be determined, may find her last location." Morales felt a chill. After nearly 40 years, what Ortega had written seemed about to be tested again. Only this time, they had tools the previous generation never had. 3 weeks later, the Santa Rosa lab sent the first preliminary report. In the red sand A1 sample, mixed DNA traces were detected, including a female gene sequence matching common genetic traits and a distinct unknown male gene sequence. Results were not yet enough to identify individuals, but sufficient to confirm human DNA presence in the soil, something no one had considered before. Morales immediately requested expanded testing and entered the genetic data into the CUDIS system. At the same time, she contacted the Mendocino Sheriff's Office to inform them file MW8301-4 had been shifted to active reinvestigation status. At the Mendocino office, young investigators were surprised to hear the case name. Many had never even known of Rachel Worthing. But when Morales presented details, they began re-screening archived data, scene maps, car photos, old suspect lists. Everything was still in the original file. Ortega had documented so meticulously that after 40 years, all information remained usable. Morales silently thanked the predecessor she had never met, who had carefully preserved the small pieces of a case thought lost to oblivion. On April 5, 2022, the California Department of Justice issued an official document, File MW8301-4, Worthing, Rachel, reinvestigated under cold case procedures. Attached was confirmation of valid original evidence, standard compliant DNA samples, and access to expanded genetic analysis systems. As Morales signed the receipt protocol, she paused her pen for a second, looking at the bold line, "Case reopened." In the quiet file room, she felt as if hearing a faint echo from the past. Ortega's voice, old report pages, and perhaps the unheard voice of the woman who vanished in 1983. Nearly 4 decades after that day, the Rachel Worthing case was officially reopened. No one knew where the results would lead, but at least, for the first time in 39 years, the dusty evidence in the cold storage had once again been touched by light. When expanded testing was complete, the results report was sent directly to Detective Lena Morales' office in mid-May 2022. The report was nearly 20 pages thick, carefully sealed with the Santa Rosa Lab stamp. Morales opened the envelope, reading each line with absolute focus. According to the official conclusion, the red Sanda-1 sample contained clearly identified male DNA traces, separated from other mixed sequences. These traces did not belong to technicians or anyone who had handled the evidence over 4 decades. The genetic data was cross-referenced with the National CODIS system, yielding a match with an individual registered in California's civilian DNA database, Christopher McCallen, 64 years old, residing in Crescent City. Morales paused for a long time at that name. McCallen, the man who appeared in the 1983 investigation file, interrogated by Sheriff Ortega himself, but not prosecuted due to lack of evidence. 40 years later, his name returned, this time not through statements, but through DNA traces, undeniable proof. Morales rechecked the entire original file to confirm the connection. In Ortega's report, McCallen was described as Pacific Drive route garbage collector, present near victim's residence area, on disappearance morning, tense reactions during interrogation, inconsistent statements. However, at the time, there was no physical evidence to charge, and he was classified as person to monitor. When the case closed, McCallen disappeared from police records, no criminal history, no further notes. Morales searched current databases, finding McCallen retired, living alone in an old house on the outskirts of Crescent City, nearly 250 miles from Fort Bragg. Over the past 30 years, he had no involvement in any crimes, but was administratively fined for minor disorderly conduct in 1996. Morales printed all the information, comparing McCallen's young photo from the old file with his current ID photo. Silver hair, more gaunt face, but basic features still clear. Broad forehead, thick nose bridge, square chin. She marked it in red pen, circling the name, Christopher McCallen. Suspect match. Then Morales contacted the Mendocino prosecutor's office to present the results. An emergency meeting was held the same day with DOJ representatives, the county prosecutor, and the current sheriff attending. The report was summarized: male DNA 100% match with citizen Christopher McCallen's data. Error rate less than 1 in 10 billion. No chance of random coincidence. The room fell dead silent. The prosecutor asked, "Any chance of DNA cross-contamination during storage?" Morales replied directly, "No, sample sealed intact since 1983, opened under dual supervision, all procedures videoed and documented. This DNA could only be in the soil sample when collected from the scene. That meant McCallen was present where Rachel Worthing's car had been, or he was the one who drove it. It was the first time in nearly 40 years a concrete trace appeared in a case thought buried in oblivion." After the meeting, Morales was tasked with expanded investigation to verify McCallen's identity and actions at the time of the case. She revisited Ortega's work logs, especially the detailed interrogation description. Ortega had written, subject tense when asked about Sunday morning schedule, said he didn't remember clearly, then contradicted himself in restatement. Noted psychological instability, but no physical evidence to proceed. Those lines now carried different meaning. To Morales, they were an early warning no one then had tools to prove. She sent an official request to the Mendocino court for approval of personal surveillance on McCallen. In the proposal, she wrote, DNA results confirm suspect's presence in area directly related to primary evidence in 1983 Worthing case. Request surveillance of activities, movements, and additional DNA collection for confirmation. The order was approved within 48 hours. A DOJ undercover investigation team was dispatched to Crescent City for tracking. Meanwhile, Morales stayed in Sacramento, continuing to screen old files for any details strengthening the link. She discovered in the original scene examination transcript that Ortega had collected another red soil sample from the undercarriage, but not sent for analysis due to technical limits. She requested the Santa Rosa Evidence Warehouse locate that sample. If it still existed, it could be second evidence confirming McCallen's presence. 3 days later, storage confirmed the sample intact, seal undamaged. Morales immediately had it transferred to Santa Rosa Lab for parallel testing. That same night, in the quiet office, Morales reopened the 1983 scene photo. The Volvo parked askew on the roadside, sea fog blurring the glass, and in the low corner faint tire tracks imprinted in the soil. She wondered, did McCallen drive that car, or was he just coincidentally there? Whatever the answer, his DNA was the only piece connecting past to present. The next morning, the surveillance order took effect. 2 DOJ undercover agents began tracking McCallen, one posing as a utility technician, the other renting an apartment across from his house. The first report to Morales noted, subject lives alone, minimal interaction, occasionally goes to nearby supermarket, no unusual behavior. But to Morales, that normality was just a thin shell. She knew every long-dormant case restarted from what seemed calm. That afternoon, she signed a summary document to the county prosecutor, male DNA identified as matching Christopher McCallen, 64, residing in Crescent City. Subject interrogated in 1983, but not prosecuted. Surveillance and information collection orders issued. As she signed, Morales knew Rachel Worthing's disappearance was no longer a dusty file. It had returned, with a name history once overlooked. And this time, not just on statements, but undeniable scientific evidence. Immediately after the DNA results identifying the suspect were announced, and the McCallen surveillance order took effect, Detective Lena Morales decided to return to where all initial traces originated, the Fort Bragg industrial area. It was the place Sheriff Ortega, 40 years earlier, suspected Rachel Worthing may have reached, but then he lacked physical evidence to prove. Morales wanted to examine the terrain firsthand, check similarities between the remaining red soil sample and the actual environment. To charge, she needed to prove the soil in Rachel's car could come from nowhere else but this area. In June 2022, she and 2 DOJ forensic technicians drove to Fort Bragg. The old industrial zone lay on the town's northern edge, surrounded by mottled brick walls and abandoned warehouses. Part of the land was now overgrown with bushes and moss, but Morales still recognized the characteristic from the 1983 report: ground dark red, fine grains like iron dust, shoes picking up a pale red powder with every step. Under sunlight, the entire area reflected a faint metallic sheen, looking covered in a giant rust layer. She opened the Mendocino County geological map, comparing old mining sites. Most land was once metal processing yards and lumber mills, active through the 1970s, 1980s. Morales marked 5 suspect points based on Ortega's old map, then began field survey. She and the team walked along the western fence, where cracked brick exposed darker soil. Underfoot, thick red soil layered over thin brown sand. She bent down, scooped a bit into numbered plastic bag, FB01. In her notebook, she noted, grain structure matches red sand A1. Needs analysis comparison. They proceeded deeper between 2 ruined warehouses, the air heavy with rust and old oil smell. Here, Morales noticed a several square meter flat area unusually smooth, as if compressed by heavy weight. Around it, sparse weeds, but that spot nearly bare. A technician probed with a soil rod, finding subsurface harder and denser than normal, about 50 centimeters deep. Morales ordered scanning with a handheld magnetic scanner, device detecting subsurface material density differences. Results showed a dark blue block on screen, elongated shape right against the brick wall. Sign of artificially compacted soil. Morales marked the position, photographed the scene from multiple angles. In afternoon light, the moss-covered brick wall grew gloomy, and in that silent setting, she clearly sensed something unnatural. Ortega had written in his 1983 report that Fort Bragg industrial area had the only soil matching the car sample, but he couldn't pinpoint location. Now, before her, Everything seemed to align. After surface scanning, Morales ordered deep soil coring. 3 core samples taken at different depths, 10 centimeters, 30 centimeters, and 60 centimeters. Each sealed separately, labeled FB01A, FB01B, and FB01C. At deepest layer, the drill hit something hard, producing a dry clang through the soil. Technicians stopped, checked the bit, found dark metal streaks. They halted there, not digging further as Morales wanted to preserve the scene for future official search. While collecting soil samples, Morales circled the area once more. She discovered on the old brick wall, at hip height, a round dent, as if struck by heavy object. Beside the dent were old rust-brown streaks, origin hard to determine. She photographed, added to new scene photo file. As sunlight faded, Morales looked around the empty lot, strange feeling like standing between 2 times, part past and part present intersecting. Back at Santa Rosa Lab, FB01 samples were processed and compared to the 1983 Red Sanda 1. Results returned after 1 week. Report stated clearly, mineral composition and iron oxide ratio, 100% match with Red Sanda 1. Same grain size, crystal structure and color characteristics. Conclusion, same geological source. Morales read it, said nothing, just nodded. All data now closed a circle, soil in Rachel's car, soil at Fort Bragg scene, and McCallen's DNA, all intersecting at one point. She immediately returned to Fort Bragg for final check. This time, the area cordoned wider with county office representatives and 2 DOJ staff. Morales led them to the exact brick wall spot with compacted soil. She pointed to the oddly flat ground and said briefly, "This is the area to note." Technicians used measuring tape to determine the anomalous zone size, about 2.5 meters wide, over 3 meters long, nearly rectangular shape, indicating ground interfered with strong mechanical force, possibly heavy object pressure or artificial filling. Under laser scan light, the compressed block shape showed clearly on 3D map. Morales noted in temporary transcript, location Fort Bragg Industrial Lot, coordinates 39, 446 degree N, 123, 805 degree W. Detected anomalous compacted soil near old brick wall. Soil samples at this position fully match victim vehicle sample. High likelihood this is where Rachel Worthing arrived or was brought before disappearance. She signed, set the pen down slowly, then closed the notebook. Before leaving the scene, Morales stood still for a long time, looking at the silent red soil underfoot. Sea wind blew carrying salt mixed with rust smell, exactly as described in Ortega's old report. Nearly 40 years passed, this place retained the same color as that day, only now someone had returned to continue the unfinished work. In the sunset, Morales knew this industrial area was not just forgotten land, it was the only remaining witness to a story time had tried to cover. After Fort Bragg soil analysis confirmed absolute match with Red Sanda 1, Detective Lena Morales knew the next step could not be delayed, needed direct biological evidence from Christopher McCallen to solidify the evidence chain. She contacted the undercover team monitoring McCallen in Crescent City, requesting they collect indirect DNA from daily personal items he used. This had to be done in absolute secrecy, without alerting the subject or changing his habits. McCallen lived alone in a small wooden house on the city outskirts, daily driving an old pickup to a nearby convenience store for coffee and newspaper. He was quiet, fixed routine, sat in the back corner, finished drinking, left the paper cup on the table. One early July morning, the first surveillance agent sat 2 tables away, noted exact departure time, then signaled the partner to retrieve the cup. The paper cup was picked with gloves, sealed on site, and sent immediately to Santa Rosa Lab. Same day, they collected a half-smoked cigarette McCallen discarded near the outside trash. When Morales received the lab report, she nearly held her breath. DNA analysis results showed gene sequences from the cigarette and coffee cup fully matching the male DNA found in the Red Sanda 1 soil from Rachel Worthing's car. Error probability noted in report, less than 1 in 10 billion. Absolute match level. This meant the man present at the 1983 scene was Christopher McCallen. Morales printed the results, marked confirmed match in red pen, then placed it atop Ortega's old file copy. After nearly 4 decades, all his suspicions proven by science. However, to Morales, DNA alone was not enough. She needed to reconstruct the timeline and specific connection between McCallen and Rachel. She requested the team check McCallen's old workplace in city archives. Mendocino Sanitation Services. Paper records were old, but fortunately, 1980s garbage truck operation logs were still preserved in company document storage. Morales and another investigator went in person to examine. Thick files stacked in wooden crates, different cover colors per year. She flipped through until finding the 1983 log. Page 164, marked in faded blue ink. There, in the Sunday, June 12, 1983 entry, handwritten in black ink, "Stop, Rachel Sant." Morales paused, staring long at those 3 words. Rachel Saint, the street where Rachel Worthing lived. In other years, no similar entry appeared, as that route was not in Sunday garbage collection. Normally, they operated Monday and Thursday. This meant McCallen stopped the truck against regulations in the victim's home area on the exact day she disappeared. Morales copied the log page verbatim, photographed, and sealed in evidence protocol. Leaving the document storage, she knew she had the final piece to legalize an arrest warrant. That afternoon, Morales presented all documents to the Mendocino County prosecutor. The file, over 200 pages thick, including DNA reports, soil comparison results, Fort Bragg scene photos, and 1983 garbage truck log copy. The prosecutor read slowly, not looking up until the last page. He said briefly, "Sufficient legal basis. We proceed with arrest warrant request." Morales signed the proposal, submitted to the regional judge. The warrant was approved the next morning, with temporary charge, directly related to the disappearance and suspected causing death of Rachel Worthing, 1983. At the same time, the Crescent City surveillance team received notice to coordinate with local SWAT for execution. Morales emphasized in directives, arrest under absolute safe conditions, avoid attention, as McCallen was unaware of surveillance. That evening, Morales stayed alone in the office. She organized all files, left side Ortega's documents, right side her 2022 investigation. 2 eras, 40 years apart, but small details connected in a straight line. The Volvo, red soil, Fort Bragg, and finally Christopher McCallen's name. On the desk, she opened the old sanitation company log, looking at the slightly shaky handwritten "Stop, Rachel Saint." Ink faded, paper yellowed, but that line carried enough weight to pull the entire case from the past back. Early next morning, Morales received confirmation call from the prosecutor. Arrest warrant approved by judge, effective immediately. She was silent for a few seconds. Everything this case lacked for 40 years, a direct evidence, matching DNA chain, specific time and location data, now existed. Before leaving the office to prepare for arrest coordination, Morales wrote in her work log the final line. DNA full match. Timestamp matches suspect route. Arrest warrant signed. After 39 years, Worthing file officially shifts status from missing to criminal investigation. She set down the pen, looked through the window where morning light hit the building's white wall, peaceful and cold, just like the red soil in Fort Bragg. On the morning of July 18, 2022, at 6:45 a.m., the California DOJ SWAT team coordinated with Crescent City local police to surround the small wooden house where Christopher McCallen lived. The house was on the edge of a pine forest, nearly 10 miles from downtown, weathered wood walls, roof tiles collapsed in one corner. McCallen, now 64, lived alone, no close family or neighbors. When police knocked and announced the arrest warrant, he appeared confused but did not resist. McCallen only asked in a hoarse, weak voice, "For what?" Morales, present at the scene, replied briefly, related to the disappearance of Rachel Worthing, Mendocino, 1983. The words made him freeze, face visibly paling, but then he nodded, silently extending his hands for cuffing. McCallen was taken to the Crescent City Police Department, where the interrogation room had been prepared in advance. The small room had white walls, a wooden table, 2 chairs. Morales and an assistant prosecutor were present. In the corner, audio recorder and camera ran continuously. At the start, McCallen maintained a calm demeanor, even slightly indifferent. When asked if he knew Rachel Worthing, he answered slowly, "No, I only heard about it in the papers years ago." Morales opened the old file, placed in front of him a photo of Rachel's house and the 1983 garbage route. "You worked here, this route. You're sure you never met her?" McCallen looked down at the table, then shrugged. "Maybe I passed by, but didn't know her. I hauled trash everywhere. I don't remember everyone." Morales continued, voice even and firm, "We have DNA evidence from soil in Rachel Worthing's car, collected in 1983. That DNA fully matches you." McCallen looked up, eyes flashing panic. He started to say something, but closed his mouth. Morales let the silence stretch, then continued. "We also have the garbage truck log, noting stop Rachel sec. Quote, comma, the exact day she disappeared. You were the only one driving that truck." The air in the room thickened. McCallen breathed heavily, rubbing his hands together, eyes fixed on the floor. After a few minutes of silence, he spoke softly, trembling. Where did you get that DNA?" Morales did not answer. She only said, "We need you to explain, why is your DNA in evidence from a missing person?" For the first hour, McCallen remained evasive. He insisted he was innocent, that Fort Bragg soil isn't just me walking through it. Morales stayed patient, presenting each document, soil comparison results, travel, route, map, 1983 scene photo. Each piece of evidence placed on the table like a reminder. When she said, "We're not basing this on assumptions. Your DNA is undeniable," McCallen looked up, eyes scattered. He sighed, voice choked. "I didn't do anything to her. I was just there." Morales pressed immediately. "There where, McCallen?" "At Fort Bragg." "At the car?" McCallen looked around the room, as if seeking escape. After nearly 2 hours, he began changing his statement. He said that Sunday morning, while driving past Rachel's area, he saw her standing on the road, seeming to have car trouble. He stopped to ask. She asked for a ride to Fort Bragg because she wanted to find an acquaintance working there. McCallen said he agreed, thinking he'd get a little money. They drove, arrived at an abandoned warehouse near the old mill, and she got out, told me to wait. Then he said, she never returned. When Morales asked why he didn't report to police, McCallen only bowed his head. "I was scared. I thought she left. I didn't want to get involved." Morales did not believe that account. She knew his DNA in the soil couldn't come from just stopping and waiting. She looked straight at him, voice harder. "If you only gave her a ride, why is your DNA in the compacted soil at Fort Bragg, where we just discovered?" McCallen paled, fell completely silent. A moment later, he whispered softly, "You wouldn't understand. Back then, I didn't mean to." The words made Morales pause. She leaned forward. "What did you say?" McCallen was silent longer, then continued, voice shaking. "I didn't want to kill anyone." She fell, then I panicked. "I just wanted to stop it." The entire room went quiet. Morales signaled the technician to continue recording, then asked slowly, "Where did Rachel fall, McCallen?" He closed his eyes, hands clenched tight. "At Fort Bragg, near the old wall. She fell, hitting her head, didn't get up. I was afraid people would think I did something bad. I dragged her to the empty lot, then covered her." Morales kept her voice calm. "Covered with what?" He answered, barely audible. "Soil, red soil. I thought no one would find out." Morales looked at the prosecutor, both understanding. She continued, "Exact location, can you point it out?" McCallen nodded weakly. He said the place was behind the brick wall of the old industrial area, near a long-cut tree stump, where the ground was flat and dry. "She's still there," he said softly. "I never went back." When Morales asked why confess now, he only replied, "I'm old. I'm tired. Every time I sleep, I still hear the sea and see her standing there looking at me." The interrogation lasted nearly 8 hours. When finished, Morales ordered full audio transcription and statement protocol. In the signature section, McCallen shakily scrawled his name. The prosecutor read back the entire confession, confirming his cooperation. McCallen nodded, voice hoarse. "I'll take you there. It's still there." Immediately, Morales notified the Mendocino office. A scene investigation team was ordered to mobilize to Fort Bragg the next morning. Technical plans deployed, ground-penetrating radar, forensic staff, search unit. Morales sat back in the meeting room, looking down at the old industrial area map. The red dot she had circled in the first survey now meant something else, no longer assumption, but where McCallen himself confirmed. Before leaving the station, Morales passed the holding cell, where McCallen sat alone on the metal bench. He hung his head, hands clasped tight, saying nothing. In the dim hallway light, his face pale, gaunt, as if aged years overnight. Morales paused a few seconds, then walked on. She knew, after nearly 40 years, Rachel Worthing's disappearance was about to enter the phase everyone who pursued it, including old Ortega, had hoped for. The final truth about to be unearthed from Fort Bragg's red soil. On the morning of July 19, 2022, the California DOJ forensic team and Mendocino County Police arrived at the Fort Bragg industrial area, the spot Christopher McCallen had pointed out in the previous night's interrogation. The sky still misty, cold sea wind blowing, carrying the familiar rust smell. The area fully cordoned in a 200-meter radius. Technicians set barriers, tarps, marked the scene with yellow tape. Morales stood outside the boundary, observing each preparation step, eyes focused on the old brick wall she had marked weeks earlier. Right there, McCallen had said, "She's still there." The forensic team began with ground-penetrating radar surface scan. On screen appeared a clearly different density area from surroundings, a block about 2.5 meters long, nearly 1 meter deep. Reflection signals indicated solid object under red soil. Morales nodded, confirming position matched McCallen's described coordinates. After full scene photography, excavation began. Red soil scraped in thin layers with specialized trowels. Each layer removed released a strong wet metal smell. After nearly an hour, at about 60 centimeters depth, technicians discovered the first object. A small bone fragment, thin and gray-white, lying sideways in hard soil. The entire area immediately narrowed, focused lights. Technicians bent low, brushing around with soft brushes. Bone pieces gradually appeared, ribs, arm bone, then human skull lightly cracked at the back. With the bones, they found fabric remnants, seemingly rotted cotton, pale ivory color. No one spoke. Only continuous camera clicks and wind whistling through wall cracks. Morales approached, standing behind the protective barrier. She looked down, recognizing beside the right-hand bones something glinting under soil, a small round object. Technician used tweezers to extract a broken silver chain fragment, thin, twisted wire with bent clasp, identical to evidence collected under the driver's seat in Rachel's 1983 Volvo. Morales bowed her head, breathed deeply, knowing this match was no coincidence. After 3 hours of meticulous excavation, the entire skeleton emerged nearly intact. Position on side, hands folded before chest, legs straight. Around ribs still fabric traces, and at neck, broken silver chain with a piece attached. All photographed, measured, then lifted to surface on white sheet. Initial forensic determination, female, age about 40, height matching Rachel Worthing. Morales stood still long, watching as the remains bag was sealed. No one on the team doubted. That afternoon, the body was transferred to Santa Rosa Forensic Center for examination. Forensic specialists compared Rachel's old dental records, stored in 1983 file, with skeleton tooth structure. Results showed full match at right molar position, where a distinctive silver filling was noted by dentist 40 years earlier. For final confirmation, they cross-referenced DNA by taking bone sample and comparing to hair DNA from Ava Worthing, Rachel's daughter, now adult living in Oregon. Results returned 3 days later, 99.999% match. Remains are Rachel Worthing. When the report reached Morales's desk, she only looked at the final conclusion line, then folded it, hand still gripping the paper edge. The feeling was not joy, but heaviness, as if the entire room air slowed. She knew what Ortega had sought for a year of investigation was now confirmed by irrefutable evidence. Rachel Worthing was dead, her body buried where in 1983 they had searched in vain. A small press conference was held at the Mendocino office. Spokesperson read a brief statement. On July 19, 2022, California authorities discovered the remains of victim Rachel Worthing, missing since 1983. Identity confirmation based on dental records and DNA results. Investigation upgraded from disappearance to homicide. The room silent as the line was read. Those who knew the old case, reporters, former police, locals, all shared one reaction: stunned. No one expected a 4-decade mystery solved by technology and a new generation's persistence. At Santa Rosa, Morales stood with the forensic team beside the sealed remains bag. She said softly, as if to the deceased, "We found you." In that moment, Ortega's image, the sheriff who patiently noted every detail years ago, appeared in her mind. He was right to believe the answer lay in the red soil, only he was no longer here to witness. That evening, Morales wrote in her work log, July 19, 2022, Fort Bragg, Old Industrial Area. Excavated and identified Rachel Worthing's remains. Silver chain evidence matches 1983 collection. Identity confirmed by dental and DNA. File MW83014, officially reclassified from missing to homicide. She set down the pen, closed the book, then looked out the window where streetlight reflected on red soil, still clinging to her shoes. Outside, sea wind blew again, carrying a long, steady whistle, like the echo of 40 years' silence finally broken. The forensic autopsy report was completed on July 26, 2022, nearly a week after Rachel Worthing's remains were excavated. Results, signed by Dr. Lauren Cavanaugh, California's top forensic expert, stated cause of death: severe cranial trauma from strong impact, leading to internal hemorrhage and death on site. Back of skull had nearly 8-centimeter crack, consistent with hard object strike or strong fall onto hard ground. No knife or gunshot traces, no evidence of binding or sexual assault. However, rib and left arm fracture patterns indicated victim fell in a push direction, not self-fall. Cavanaugh concluded, death occurred within minutes of injury, no signs of aid. Case of death by external force. When Morales read the report, she realized the final picture was emerging. 40 years earlier, Sheriff Ortega wrote, "No body, no blood, but signs the car was driven by someone after the victim." Now, everything aligned with that assumption. Same day, Morales and the investigation team held a summary meeting at DOJ Santa Rosa office to reconstruct the entire case based on current evidence, forensic report, McCallen's confession, DNA data, car location, and travel route. According to reconstruction, Sunday morning, June 12, 1983, Rachel Worthing left home with young daughter Ava. She planned to drive shopping in Santa Rosa around 8 a.m. on Pacific Drive. The car may have had minor issue, or Rachel stopped near garbage collection area, where Christopher McCallen was working. McCallen, then 24, recognized her and approached. They may have been casually acquainted in the neighborhood. Per McCallen's statement, "She talked a few times when I collected trash." Initial conversation seemed normal, but then conflict arose, cause possibly Rachel refusing help, or words angering McCallen. Forensics determined death time matching 9:10 a.m. frame, when McCallen was on this route. Fort Bragg traces showed body buried within hours before soil dried. This confirmed suspect transported body to industrial area same day. Morales and technicians reconstructed route from Pacific Drive to Fort Bragg, about 40 miles, under 45 minutes drive. High likelihood McCallen used the garbage truck to transport body, then returned to Rachel's area, placed daughter Ava in victim's Volvo, and left near residence to create false scene. This made everyone believe Rachel, only missing, never left the area. At the meeting, Morales presented each case progression step using maps and images, DNA traces, soil examination results, and matching silver chain arranged in logical timeline. Summary report showed no other third party in the incident time frame. McCallen was the only one with opportunity, means, and motive, though motive possibly impulsive, not premeditated. When asked about motive in final interrogation, McCallen said, "She insulted me. I just pushed her away. She fell, head hit the rock. I panicked, didn't know what to do. I thought if found, they'd blame me." This statement matched examination, no weapon attack signs, but strong fall injury. This reinforced conclusion: Rachel died from impact, no aid, and McCallen concealed death by burying body. Investigation also compared skull crack to Fort Bragg terrain surface. Scene photos showed broken concrete block at wall edge, exact position McCallen described. Experts reconstructed, determining if victim fell backward with strong push, impact angle would match skull crack in forensic report. One technician commented, "That impact enough to kill in minutes." After completing reconstruction, Morales concluded in Investigation Protocol 1, incident time morning June 12, 1983, approx. 8:30, 9:30 a.m. 2. Initial contact location, Pacific Drive route, near garbage collection. 3. Death and burial location, Fort Bragg industrial area, about 40 miles away. 4. Transport means, garbage truck, driven by McCallen. 5. Post-incident actions. McCallen moved body to Fort Bragg, buried, then returned car and victim's daughter, near home to mislead investigation. Same day, the case file was completed for the first time in nearly 4 decades. Every evidence chain part from 1983 physical items to 2022 DNA data linked into one unified file, new code, case ID MW83014R. In the summary to prosecutor, Morales wrote, based on forensic results, DNA, suspect confession and comparison data, Rachel Worthing case determined as homicide by external force. Christopher McCallen's actions include involuntary manslaughter and intentional body concealment, executed immediately after death. Scene elements proved deliberate interference to mislead investigation. As she set down the pen to sign, a heavy feeling crept in. The case Ortega once called a mystery in the fog now had its resolution. But at the same time, Morales understood no justice could fully compensate for 40 years of silence. In the dim evening light, she looked at Rachel's photo on the case board. A woman with lightly curly hair, calm eyes. Below, a new note was added, case reclassified, homicide. In early August 2022, after completing the entire investigation file, the Mendocino County District Attorney's Office officially announced the indictment of Christopher McCallen. The charging document was signed by District Attorney Harold Gaines, including 3 main counts: kidnapping, manslaughter, and concealment of a corpse. This was the first time in 40 years the Rachel Worthing case returned to the justice system as a complete criminal case. Gaines called it one of the longest and most complex reinvestigations in county history. At the Mendocino Courthouse press conference, Gaines presented briefly, "We have physical biological evidence and suspect statements consistent with the incident progression. This data is sufficient for criminal prosecution under current law, despite the 1983 occurrence." Behind him, Morales and the investigation team stood silently, no comments. Each understood this indictment resulted from months of cross-referencing, analysis, and piecing together fragments of a once-forgotten file. The prosecution file was nearly 400 pages thick, starting with an incident summary. 1. June 12, 1983, Rachel Worthing disappeared with her young daughter. 2. 2 days later, her car was discovered. Daughter found safe. 3. July 2022, body excavated at Fort Bragg, identity confirmed by DNA. 4. Christopher McCallen, garbage collector, identified as suspect via DNA match with 1983 sample. The second part detailed charges. Kidnapping. McCallen forced Rachel off a safe route, taking her to Fort Bragg against her will. Manslaughter, pushing leading to fatal injury, confirmed by forensic results. Concealment of corpse. McCallen intentionally buried the body at Fort Bragg. Moved vehicle and victim's daughter to mislead investigation. Gains emphasized in presentation. All actions form a continuous chain, though suspect denies intent to kill. Evidence shows he understood consequences and deliberately concealed for decades. Key evidence listed in the file included 1. DNA results, absolute match between red sand, 1 soil sample, and McCallen's personal items. 2. Suspect statement. In July 18, 2022 interrogation, McCallen admitted being with Rachel at Fort Bragg and knowing body location. 3. Forensic results. Death caused severe cranial trauma from strong impact, matching suspect description. 4. Garbage truck log, June 12, 1983 page with stop, Rachel Saint, proving McCallen near victim's home at disappearance time. 5. Excavation scene, remains discovery, silver chain matching car evidence, characteristic Fort Bragg red soil. Each evidence attached photos, sealed protocols, legal confirmations. Morales named primary investigation witness, responsible for compiling and presenting facts at trial. She spent hours reviewing every detail, ensuring all seals, signatures, dates accurate, as any error could affect prosecution. On August 9, McCallen transferred from Crescent City detention to Mendocino County Jail, awaiting trial. When informed of charges, he showed no strong reaction. In the indictment reading, McCallen only said briefly, "I didn't mean to. I just wanted it to go away." Prosecutor Gaines noted this response in protocol, assigned suspect no longer denied, but not fully accepting responsibility. To strengthen the file, Morales proposed re-interviewing surviving 1983 witnesses, neighbors, rescue workers, McCallen's old sanitation co-workers. They confirmed that Sunday morning, McCallen used the garbage truck despite no schedule. One co-worker recalled hearing him say, "Need to stop by Rachel Street for something," before leaving the depot. This testimony recorded and added to supporting evidence, completing the event timeline. In the report to prosecution, Morales wrote, "Investigation goal not only case closure, but ensuring all data withstands law. Though time erased most witnesses and evidence, remaining sufficient to prove Christopher McCallen's crimes, who caused Rachel Worthing's death and concealed truth for 4 decades. On August 15, 2022, Mendocino County Court confirmed preliminary hearing schedule. Prosecution prepared summary for jury, emphasizing the case, proof of scientific evidence power, and long-term evidence preservation value. Morales designated prosecution's main witness, responsible for explaining investigation logic, from 1983 red soil sample to 2022 arrest warrant. That evening, she returned to DOJ Santa Rosa office, organized all documents in 2 file boxes, labeled anew, State of California versus Christopher McCallen. Prepared for court. Looking at that line, Morales knew her work was nearly done. The rest for court and justice to decide. But inside, she couldn't help thinking of predecessor Ortega, who wrote in his final report, "It may take many years, but one day that red soil will speak the truth." Now the truth had spoken, and Morales's task was to bring it to legal light. Christopher McCallen's trial officially opened on October 10, 2022, at Mendocino County Courthouse, California. After nearly 40 years since Rachel Worthing's disappearance, The small Main Street courtroom was packed with reporters, witnesses, and case followers. The atmosphere thick, heavy yet historic, a case thought forever buried in cold files now before justice. Prosecutor Harold Gaines represented the state, defense by public defender John Reeves, experienced in homicides, but never a 4-decade-spanning case. McCallen, now 64, appeared in gray prison uniform, thin build, nearly all silver hair, tired eyes, but maintaining unpredictable calm. Gaines opened with a concise, firm statement. He recounted the entire case chronologically, from June 12, 1983 morning, when Rachel Worthing left with her daughter, to the abandoned Volvo discovery, 2 days later, red soil sample, DNA evidence, and finally McCallen's confession, leading to body excavation. On the large screen before the jury, images projected sequentially, dusty Volvo photo, garbage truck log copy, with Stop, Rachel St. Fort Bragg, excavation photos, forensic report. Gaines's voice even, sure, not dramatic, but each sentence like a nail. For 39 years, only one person was at all locations related to this case. Christopher McCallen. He was the last to see Rachel Worthing alive, and the one who buried the truth with her body under red soil. Defense. Reeves stood to object phrasing. He argued, prosecution creating emotion over evidence. When allowed, Reeves went straight to core argument. Your Honor, my client is not a murderer. This was an accident, a tragedy of fear and mistake, not intentional act. He presented McCallen only accidentally caused death in minor scuffle, then panicked, not knowing what to do, concealed body, a wrong act, but without murder intent. Reeves stressed, if intent to kill, why not flee the state? Why live 40 years in the same place? Real name, normal work, no further crimes. Prosecution immediately countered. Gaines argued post-death actions, transporting body, intentional burial, staging false scene, showed clear guilt concealment awareness. He played interrogation recording, where McCallen said, I was afraid people would think I did something bad. Gaines turned to jury. He wasn't afraid because innocent. He was afraid because he knew he was guilty. In following days, court heard expert and witness testimony. Dr. Lauren Kavanaugh, forensic examiner, called first. She detailed autopsy. Skull crack shows impact from behind, 30-degree angle to ground, inconsistent with natural fall. Victim had no defense chance, death within minutes. Gaines asked, any chance this fall was accidental? Kavanaugh, cannot fully rule out, but direction and force make push by another far more likely. Next was Morales's testimony. She recounted reinvestigation process, starting from red soil discovery, touch DNA testing, to McCallen admitting burial location. In court, Morales presented calmly, non-accusatory, facts only. Reeves tried trapping, Detective Morales, any direct evidence my client intended murder. Morales, no premeditation signs, but evidence he did not aid victim, then intentionally hid body. Law defines that as criminal. The answers silenced the room. Courtroom continued hearing excavation forensic staff testimony. One technician said, at about 60 cm depth, body lay neatly, indicating intentional burial, not rushed. Around shovel marks, and even compacted soil, showing performer had time and tools. This detail bolstered prosecution that McCallen was calm and aware concealing guilt. Additionally, prosecution presented supporting evidence, matching DNA on items, Fort Bragg soil, garbage log, confession protocols. Gaines pointed to evidence board, telling jury 4 decades, 4 evidence types, biological, physical, documentary, statement, all converge on one person. Defense tried shifting, arguing DNA only proves presence, not murder. Reeves stressed, no witnesses, no other violence traces besides fall. Mr. McCallen made grave mistake hiding body, but in panic, not intentional killing. In cross-examination, Gaines asked McCallen, you say accident, why not call police? McCallen hesitated, soft voice. I was scared. I thought no one would believe me. The answer quieted many in the room. The trial lasted 10 days. Media reported daily, recapping case history, connecting old and new details. Truro Cove residents followed each session. Many who knew Rachel alive attended. Court increased security due to crowd. In final days, both sides presented closing. Prosecution emphasized McCallen's action chain showed clear guilt awareness, though no prior plan. Defense pleaded jury consider circumstances and human weakness. That he lived 40 years in guilt, a sentence heavier than prison. As the 10th day ended, judge instructed jury to deliberate. McCallen returned to holding cell. Morales sat long in the empty courtroom, late daylight through windows, reflecting on case name board, State of California versus Christopher McCallen. She knew whatever verdict came, justice, though late, had finally been called. After 10 trial days, on the morning of October 21, 2022, the jury returned after nearly 2 days closed deliberation. Courtroom atmosphere tense as a wire. Press crowded hallways, Truro Cove and Mendocino locals filled seats. Morales present early, holding small notebook, eyes on jury bench. When judge requested verdict, foreperson, a middle-aged woman, stood, voice clear, no hesitation. On the charge of kidnapping, we find defendant Christopher McCallen guilty. On the charge of manslaughter, we find defendant guilty. On the charge of concealment of a corpse, we find defendant guilty. The courtroom fell dead silent, only clerk's pen scratching each word. McCallen bowed his head, hands clenched tight, said nothing. Morales exhaled lightly, feeling both heavy and empty, as if her part ended. But justice carried the sorrow of 40 years' loss. Presiding Judge Elaine Hollister read the sentencing after hearing proposals from prosecution and defense. Her voice slow, clear, echoing evenly in the silent room. The court, in the name of the state of California, sentences defendant Christopher McCallen to 25 years imprisonment, without parole, for the crimes of kidnapping and manslaughter. The defendant caused the death of Rachel Worthing, while intentionally concealing the victim's body for nearly 4 decades, causing the family and community to live in prolonged pain and doubt. This is not merely a violation of law, but a betrayal of human trust. She paused briefly, looking down at the defendant bench. The court notes the defendant's cooperation during investigation, but the fact that he buried a life, then remained silent for 40 years, is unforgivable. Any words of remorse now are too late. Then she struck the gavel once, affirming, the sentence takes effect immediately. The defendant will be transferred to San Quentin State Prison to serve the term. The gavel's decisive sound like the final period of a story spanning nearly half a century. As police escorted McCallen out of the courtroom, he glanced back at the gallery once, eyes vacant. No one spoke. A few locals began to cry. Some stood quietly. Morales sat still, watching his figure fade through the back door. In that moment, she thought of Ortega, the first sheriff who believed this disappearance was not simple. If he were alive, perhaps today he would smile. That afternoon, District Attorney Harold Gaines held a brief press conference at the Mendocino County office. He announced to the media, the Rachel Worthing case, code MW83014R, is officially closed and marked solved in the California state record system. This is proof of the value of evidence preservation and the power of modern forensic science. Justice may come late, but it never loses the trail. After his statement, he yielded the microphone to Morales. She said, only one short sentence, we did this not just to find the perpetrator, but to bring Rachel home. 1 week later, on October 28, 2022, Rachel Worthing's remains were reburied in the coastal cemetery of Truro Cove, where she once lived. The ceremony was quiet, simple, attended only by a few old friends, daughter Ava, and some investigation team members. The sky that day was clear blue, a light sea breeze carrying the salty scent. Ava, now over 40, placed a bouquet of white flowers on her mother's grave. She said nothing, only bowed her head slightly. Morales stood farther back, not wanting to interrupt that private moment, but inside rose a feeling both relieved and regretful. Justice had been served, yet too late to heal the lost years. When the burial ended, a small headstone was placed at the grave's head, engraved with the words, Rachel Worthing 1943-1983. Finally home. That evening, Morales returned to the DOJ Santa Rosa office, closed the file coded MW83014R, affixed a red solved label to the spine, then carefully placed it on the shelf among other cases. She looked at those words in silence for a long time. Outside, sunset dyed the window glass red, exactly like the color of the soil that had kept the truth hidden for 40 years. To Morales, this was not just the end of a case, but a reminder that sometimes justice does not come to punish, but to complete what was left unfinished. A person given a name, a truth returned to light. The story of Rachel Worthing is not just a case solved after 39 years. It is a very specific warning for life in America today, about personal safety, about blind trust, and about how communities often grow accustomed to the thought, that doesn't happen here. Rachel vanished in 1983, on a familiar road, in daylight, with her young daughter, in a peaceful coastal town. No gunshots, no chase, no cinematic crime scene, just a moment of contact with the garbage collector on her home route. Christopher McCallen, a man everyone thought was normal. This reflects what many in America still do today. We assess danger based on familiar appearance, and thus often fail to notice small unusual behaviors before they become disasters. The lesson here is personal safety boundaries are not always clear, and we have the right to maintain them, even if it makes others uncomfortable. Another point, the case took nearly 4 decades to resolve, not only due to lack of DNA technology, but also because details were not fully recorded initially, the 4-hour disappearance gap, specific route, who last saw her. In today's reality, this translates to the habit of leaving safety traces, tell someone where you're going, and with whom, keep a basic itinerary, share live location with a trusted person when meeting someone unfamiliar. Finally, the story also speaks of community responsibility. The only thing that kept Rachel's case from vanishing completely was that evidence was preserved, respected, not discarded, because probably nothing. That is how justice reached Ava, the child once left in the car. This imposes a very American moral duty. When you see something wrong, don't just say not my business. Note it, report it, record details. Sometimes, you are the only reason the truth is not buried. If you believe justice can come even if late, subscribe to the channel to continue exploring cases forgotten by time with us. Thank you for following the story of Rachel Worthing. See you in the next video, where the truth is once again brought to light.